were able to defeat the Allies, but there were places along the Normandy beach where the Germans did not have any men. And I say the British and Canadians had a fairly easy time of it. The Americans bungled their way to victory. Nevertheless, D-Day, now on June 6th, if you're paying any attention, you'll see a reference to it. And these days, the few men who were left who took part are sometimes asked to go back and look over the beaches again, especially on a year ending in the number 4. Guess what, folk? This year ends with a number 4. How many years has it been? 80 years. No, wait a minute. 4, this is 14, 70 years. Yeah, it's been 70 years. Come June 6th, and I'm sure if you're paying attention, there'll be something on TV about it, something on the radio about it, something in the papers, they'll have a write-up in the magazines about it, and some of the old veterans now, some of them are really, really old, will go back and look the place over and say, yes, I was here, we crossed right here, we came across here. World War II vets today are dying faster than they did during the war, and that's on all sides. But there are still a few of them around. June 6, 1944. Now, once the Allies had a toehold in France, they began pushing toward Germany. They liberated Paris. They had 2.5 million men and 500,000 vehicles that broke through the German defenses. They began to move south and east. Then they crossed the Rhine River, and when they crossed the Rhine, they were inside German territory. Adolf Hitler said to his people, now I know you've heard that the enemy has gotten inside our territory, but you just wait, we have some super weapons and we're going to destroy them, we're going to crush them yet. The super weapons partially existed. The Germans had developed a jet aircraft, but they didn't have all the bugs out of it. They were working hard on the atomic bomb, and they had a rocket plane. But what happened with a lot of German scientists, they began to defect and come to both the Soviet Union and the United States and began to help the Allied cause instead of the German cause. Early in 1945, Hitler moved into a bunker 55 feet under Berlin, and he was directing the war from the bunker. He told his people in one of his last speeches, I hope you will always observe the laws of race. And he said, if they asked if he had any regrets, he said, yes, I do regret there are still Jews in the world. On April 30th, he committed suicide. On April 28th, 2 days earlier, Mussolini had been shot by Italians. On May 7th, Germany surrendered. Your book doesn't mention it, but at one time they called it VE Day, Victory in Europe. VE for Victory in Europe. When the Germany surrendered, Adolf Hitler was deceased. Most of Hitler's followers wound up committing suicide, at least it's called Himmler, Goebbels, Göring, all committed suicide, but some of them found their way out of Germany into Switzerland, and from Switzerland they found their way into Latin America, and from time to time, and some of them found their way to the United States. From time to time he reports that we have a former Nazi living among us who committed some atrocity. Some of them still seem to be around. All right, now, which takes us up to Japan. But before I get there,
have you ever seen a movie called Saw?
Seen what?
Saw?
No. I'll tell you, I have seen many a World War II movie, and about 18 months ago, I bought a World War II documentary, and I said to my wife, if my folk gets too bad, I might show it, but it's really illegal to show those kind of things in a classroom setting because of copyright laws. But anyway, I didn't.
It's about this woman who was born in, I think, Germany.
Yeah.
Or somewhere. but she's I think a communist or something. Well, supposed to be. She was raised with a whole bunch of other people to come over to the United States and destroy it when she got older. And then when she got older, she started working for the United States government. And then the old guy tried to come over and tried to get her to, I guess, go with the plan.
Yeah.
But she went against the plan to take over.
Basically, she became converted to the United States. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And she wanted, she liked her life, so she killed everybody.
There were some mysterious explosions that occurred in the United States we've forgotten about. But your history books hardly mention it, but there were some explosions that were said to be the work of German agents. And the history books now would say that the United States soil was never attacked, but actually that might not be true. But these explosions occurred. The people who went through them are now deceased mostly. And this time, there were a bunch of explosions. There were German agents who infiltrated the United States, and some of them got pretty far up. But a bunch of them, like you say, particularly the Nazi Zionists, began to infiltrate. Well, they went to the United States and Britain and Soviet Union and helped the United States develop a rocket, helped the United States develop the atomic bomb and a jet aircraft. So that's that movie where there was actually true, at least true to what I call true to life. Now, Japan. The Japanese were more fanatical about fighting than the Germans had been because they believed in fighting to the death. But the Japanese also had one thing that was going in our favor. If you could ever get the emperor to say stop fighting, they would all stop fighting at once. Now, in the present wars we're fighting, there's nobody who can do that. But in the case of Japan, the idea was if they could just get the emperor to agree to an unconditional surrender, it would be over. That took some doing. Anyway, shortly before Hitler died and Mussolini, Franklin Roosevelt died. Yes, Hitler and Mussolini both outlived Roosevelt. And our new president took over, named Harry Truman. Very important, because it was up to Truman to oversee the surrender of Germany and to carry out the war in Japan. Now, we had been island hopping until we got, the last island we got was the island of Okinawa. And when I was 17, I went to a church camp, and the counselor had been to Okinawa, and he told us some really horrible war stories. That but Okinawa was right next to Japan. And the next step for him was to go from Okinawa to Japan. Now, he was a replacement soldier because every American who had initially been sent to Okinawa had to be replaced. That's how bloody it was. And if he, this man, this my counselor, had gone into Japan, he would probably have been killed. It is estimated that at least 1 million persons would have been killed on both sides. 1 million American soldiers. We only lost 250,000, a quarter of a million, during the whole war. Now, if we'd have gone into Japan, we'd lost another 1 million soldiers. And in addition, the Japanese might have lost 3 or 4 million. Keep that in mind, folk, because that's not quite the way it happened. We began bombing, and some of the bombs were so awful that the persons who survived the blast might suffocate because the bombs, the heat, the flames of the bombs took out all the oxygen in the air. Some of these bombs, incendiary bombs, were used against Germany also. And by the way, it took many years to clean up the rubble in both Japan and Germany. And when I was a kid in 1964 and 65, 20 years after war was over, our teacher would tell us that some of the tanks were still on the battlefield where they'd been left. That's no longer true, but it was true then. It took many years to clean up the rubble in Europe and in Japan. Now, in the meantime, once Harry Truman became president, some generals met with him and they said, now, Mr. Truman, you may remember, you were in charge of the Senate investigating war waste. Yes, I was. He said, well, you were wondering where millions of dollars were going that you couldn't account for. Yeah, well, you were told to keep your hands off. Yes. Well, here's what that money was going for. We've developed a secret weapon that is so secret, but we believe, it's fear, we believe that it will make the Japanese surrender Should we use it? Harry Truman gave the go-ahead. We demanded of the Japanese that they unconditionally surrender, they wouldn't. So, in August of 1945, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb that had ever been dropped, as far as we know. The bomb was dropped on the city of Hiroshima, Japan. The blast was horrific. The crew who carried the bomb, specially trained, immediately, as soon as they dropped the bomb, they turned around and took off. When they were 11 miles from blast, they could feel the blast even from 11 miles away and some 20,000 feet in the air. They could feel the blast from it. Japan still did not surrender. So a couple days later, crew went and dropped another bomb on the city of Nagasaki. In both cases, 70,000 people at least were killed in the initial blast. At that point, finally, the Japanese surrendered unconditionally. Again, I'm open for discussion. If any of you think it was right or wrong, I've had students tell me they think it was wrong. But all right, I want you to remind, before anybody says anything, you have to understand, folks. The men who made the decision to drop the atomic bomb had not gone through one world war. They had gone through 2 world wars. None of us know what that would be like. Harry Truman had fought in World War I. But the generals had mostly been captains or lower-ranking officers in World War I. Now in World War II, they were high-ranking generals, but they'd been through 2 world wars, and they were determined that they were going to make both Germany and Japan surrender unconditionally and make sure that Germany and Japan did not rise again. Basically said, we're going to occupy Germany and Japan, and we still do to this day. We have troops in Japan, we have troops in Germany, to make sure that these countries never rise again. From that day till this, Japan has been our friend. All right, having said that, does anybody have any comments, any ideas? Was it right, was it wrong, was there another way? No. Well, I got this to say about it. We have not really won a major war since World War II. We went to Korea and fought them to a draw. We went to Vietnam and lost. We're fighting our wars too civilized, and then we're going to have our plow clean if we're really the only way. All right.
Too civilized.
If you fight a civilized war, you're going to lose. In a civil war, the South tried to fight a gentlemanly war, and the North went in and Sherman burned the city of Atlanta to the ground. He said, now I know that these people will build a more beautiful city than this one I'm burning up. So he felt badly about it, but he burned to the ground. Then he burnt a mile-wide area, and he took up all the rails and bent the rails like pretzels. I mean, had his men get the center of the rail really hot, and then had a crew just wrap them around the tree, and it had everything about metal. Once these rails were bent, they could never be straightened out. He destroyed an area, everything in sight, burned down every home, every plantation, a mile wide to cut the Confederacy in 2. It was war, and when it was over with, the bad guys had won, and the nice guys had lost. Leo DeRocher, famous baseball manager, famous for quote, "Nice guys finish last." If you don't like what I just said, you might can guess I don't like it either.
So we must be fighting some type of.
I've got something to say. I mean, I've said it. The wars that we're fighting now. All right, World War II. We got in. It lasted 1942, 1943, 1944, 1945. No, Vietnam, 1961, 1962, 1963, 1964, 1965, 1966. Getting tired? 1967. I got tired too. 1968, 1969, 1970, 1971, 1972, 1973, 1974, 1975, and we lost. The war we're fighting in Afghanistan, 2001, 2002, 2003, and I could go on. 2014 is still going on.
I thought the war was over in Afghanistan.
Huh?
I thought the war was over in Afghanistan.
We finished up in Iraq. We're still in Afghanistan. That's the count I heard. We're trying to get out. Can't find a way out. We tried to get out of Vietnam, and we finally did, and then the North Vietnamese overran the South. These wars, and the same thing happened to the Roman Empire. Their wars just went on and on and on and on, particularly the Persians and the Germans, and it destroyed them. endless wars that they would not win. But in the earlier days of Rome now, at the beginning of Rome, they went to the city of Carthage and they burned Carthage to the ground and plowed up the ground and sowed salt in the ground where the soil would never produce again, to make sure that Carthage would never be inhabited again, and sold all the Carthage people into slavery. They won in those days. Later, they became too civilized to do something so awful and so mean.
So we should be fighting guerrilla war.
Anything it
Guerrilla
takes.
warfare.
Okay. I don't want to go into gory details, but whatever it takes. I mean, if we had gone into North Vietnam like they went into us and started sniping at them just like they were at us and sneak, well, hey, they might have quit after a while. As it was, we tried to fight this humane, clean war. The result was, folks, you can't win. Anyway, we dropped 2 bombs on the Japanese. The Japanese surrendered. All right. Now, when the war was over, we went to Germany and practiced what's called denazification. All right, actually, I'm jumping ahead of the story, but your book backs up. Your book backs up to talking about what life was like inside Germany during World War II, the Nazi Empire. And talked about Hitler's plans for a racial empire. And your book has a little vignette at the top of page 744 about Hitler's secret conversation, which shows the man was completely morally bankrupt. There was nothing wrong in Hitler's eyes with taking this land from the Russians, taking the land from the Slavic people, because the superior Germans should occupy and the Slavic people should be either eliminated or made slaves, and in the long run they'd be exterminated. Hitler says, I'll go straight ahead cold-bloodedly. Whatever they may think about me is a matter of complete indifference. I mean, it said, I don't see why a German who eats a piece of bread should care that the toil that produced that bread was won by a sword. And again, Adolf Hitler wound up pointing a gun at his head and taking his own life.